I'm so happy to be here tonight to talk with Mark about his latest book, Dangerous Women. Dangerous Women is the follow-up to last year's book by Mark called Secret Lives, which was nominated for an Edgar Award. And for any of you who might not know, that's the equivalent of an Academy Award in our business. And just like the Oscars, it's an honor just to be nominated. So congratulations for that, Mark. And congratulations also for all the wonderful accolades you've been receiving for Dangerous Women. You've gotten starred reviews already in Publishers Weekly and Library Journal. Publishers Weekly, I have to read this because it was so, Publishers Weekly described it as the perfect cocktail of ingenious spycraft and political intrigue, combined with charming, uncanny energy, bewitching, which I thought was so wonderful. The book starts off with a bang when two Supreme Court clerks are attacked one night going home from work. At first, you might think, well, this is just a random mugging in Washington, D.C., but no, it's not too much of a spoiler to say the attack came from a real assassin, a professional assassin, and the reason was they wanted to steal the backpack off one of these clerks, which contained documents that might give a clue as to how the court was leaning to rule on a case involving climate change and lithium mining. So it's a high-stakes thriller, and it's full of corrupt politicians and paid assassins and all kinds of dark daring do. But I have to say it's also a total lark. And that's thanks to the most colorful and irrepressible character I've had the pleasure of meeting for a long time. Her name is Ethel Fiona Crestwater. Mark, there's a truism in publishing that you may have run into too. I've often run into it, which is that nobody in the commercial publishing world, nobody wants to read about a woman over 40. I like to say, you've stared that idea right in its ugly face when you created Ethel. Tell us about her and tell us how you were inspired to create her.
Ethel is a chance happening. And I wish I could tell you that I had created her from nothing, but a couple years ago, I was flying back from Phoenix and sitting beside a young woman on the plane. I asked her if she was going to Charlotte or if she was headed elsewhere. And she said, she's changing planes in Charlotte. She's going on to Washington, D.C. to visit her great aunt. Her great aunt was 85 and she lives in the house she was born in. Well, I found that fascinating because I don't know anybody who actually lives in the house they were born in, particularly in Washington, D.C. area where there's so much transit turnover. And so I said, well, is she staying with other family? And the woman said, no other family. Said, but we don't worry about her because she rents out rooms to FBI and Secret Service agents. And we always know there's somebody in the house with a gun. So I thought, what a gift that was. And then I also happened to know a friend of mine, actually my parents' generation, who when she was 14, went to high school in Washington, D.C., and after class would go down to the FBI offices and work in the fingerprint department. So I thought, if I made my Ethel an ex-FBI agent who had been there renting rooms for 50 years, knew everybody in the government, was a brilliant person, and I in my head, the person I saw was Ruth Bader Ginsburg if she'd been an FBI agent. That feisty kind of irrepressible energy and brilliance. And I thought, that's my Ethel. So that's how she became, rather than just someone who rented rooms, an FBI agent herself. She's very loyal to her friends. She doesn't have any family except for one living relative we'll talk about in a few minutes. And that she takes no prisoners and suffers no fools. And she's been fun to write because when I started Secret Lives, I didn't know her backstory too much. I hadn't done a lot with that. And in the course of the story, I learned things about her, skills that she had that I hadn't envisioned she had, but that she rose to accomplish when the circumstances required it.
So among those skills, she, of course, is very adept with a gun. She knows how to pick locks. She flies her own airplane. This 75-year-old woman flies her own airplane. And she can suss out stuff faster than her friends, the head of the FBI, the head of the Secret Service. I mean, she sees connections and sees things faster than anybody else does. I really like Kirkus reviews, which also gave a wonderful review to this book, said she's less Miss Marple and more Philip Marlowe. And I really like that description. She's not a sweet little old lady who just, knits and thinks about her neighbors and figures things out. I mean, she is out there doing stuff, and she's, I think, just a wonderful character. And I can totally see RBG.
And I like Kirkus' assessment of, so she's a combination kind of Miss Marple and Philip Marlowe. The Philip Marlowe hard-boiled, lots of action, lots of fighting and stuff like that. I mean, she's not quite that brutal, but she doesn't shy away from a fight either, but still has the observant powers that Miss Marple had in saying, in an English village, you find every motivation of humankind in a village, you can find it.
And I think, like Miss Marple, at first blush, people who are encountering her don't realize that she's anything other than a sweet old lady.
Right.
And that's part of her, that's one of her weapons as well, I think. One of the things that Ethel does to keep in shape is she goes down to her basement in this rooming house and does something called the RBG workout. And I'm asking for a friend. Is there really such a thing for older women?
Yes, I think so. And I'll look out at the audience and nod their head. That I think I've seen some features of her showing her with a trainer and doing stuff. And as Ethel says in the book, if RBG can be doing that exercise at 87, and we made Ethel 75, that was the publisher's suggestion, which I think was wise, to give her a little growing room, don't quite back her up too much at the end of the chronology of her life. That she said, if it's good enough for RBG, gets her to 87, then I'm going to do it myself. So that's also her motivation.
Now, you've had two other long-running series. You've set some standalones also, but you've had your Sam Blackman series and your Barry Clayton series, both of which were set in this part of the world. Sam Blackman was a more traditional detective, and Barry, whom I loved, was an undertaker. What kind of challenges did you encounter in writing now, not about a man and a younger man, but writing about an older woman?
I think in the earlier books, the Barry Clayton books and the Sam Blackman books, I wrote in first person, and I could put myself in that role. I went from the hospital to the funeral home right after I was born, because my dad was the funeral director and we lived upstairs. So I had a sense of what I would have been like had he stayed in that business. So that was writing for her. Sam Blackman, because so much of that series is based upon something that happened in Asheville and its history that creates a crime in the present, I kind of look at it again as I'm that character to a certain degree. When you come to Ethel, it's different, obviously. I'm not a 75-year-old brilliant woman, but I wrote that in third person. And so try to be true to the spunk and feistiness that she has, have that be in the voice, and then have an idea of how she will react to situations. And then I feel like I'm letting her tell me how to write her, if that makes any kind of sense. Yeah. So that's helpful. And she is fun to write. When you're writing a character, you kind of go through your daily life with a split personality. It's things that you're seeing and things that I'm thinking, what would my character see? What would Ethel do, to coin a phrase? Yeah. And I think that's the way you learn things about your character, is your subconscious is telling you things about her that it's thought about that you really hadn't consciously thought about until you need it. And then fortunately it shows up.
The other departure in this series from your other two is that you've moved to Washington, D.C. and gone into the inner workings of the Supreme Court. Now, this was obviously in my wheelhouse as a former lawyer. And I have to say, even though I never appeared in the Supreme Court, darn, but I've sent them a lot of paper over the years. I never knew that they had their own police force. This was news to me, and I was really intrigued by that. There's a lot in this book about all of the interagency friction and jurisdictional fights, and we've got the local police and the FBI, and then in Secret Lives, the Secret Service is very much involved. How did you learn all this stuff?
I talked to Secret Service agents. I talked to a deputy assistant attorney general for the Clinton administration, Justice Department. And I kind of got an understanding of how the marshal, the Supreme Court marshal, is not a U.S. marshal. He's head of the Supreme Court police force. And like you said, there's always jurisdictional issues to be dealt with. Washington, D.C. is its own, Arlington County is its own, the FBI is its own. And how do you handle all those people with an interest in it? And the thing I like about Ethel is she doesn't care.
She transcends all
She doesn't
that.
care.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of like, if this agency can help me, I'll take them. If this one can help me, I may give them some of what I know, so that reciprocity is involved. And she can color out, not only color outside the lines, she can change the entire picture, you know, at her will. And so, but you're right, it is kind of a concentration of multiple jurisdictions over the same body, so to speak.
Now, have you actually spent time in Washington?
Well, I lived there for 4 years and met my wife there, and both of our daughters live in the DC area, so we're up there quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of geography in there that, you know, rings very true, and I thought you must have spent some time there. So yeah, that explains that. Something else in both Secret Lives and Dangerous Women, you deal with what are really cutting edge issues. In Secret Lives, it was cryptocurrency, which I have to say I still don't understand. I tried and tried, I still don't understand.
I'll sell you something.
But you got it. Yeah, you could totally snooker me on that. And then in Dangerous Women, climate change, which in your afterward you call, and I agree, the existential issues facing our time. But this really interesting conflict with climate change and lithium mining. Could you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, I mean, it said that once I had Ethel as a character, I didn't have a plot for her. And but there are other elements that I have interest in. And if you're going to spend time, you know this from your terrific books that you've written, that you're going to spend a year or so with it. So it better be something that you're interested in. And so I found cryptocurrency fascinating. And I also found it fascinating that I could acquire cryptocurrency, forget my password, and see my money, but not get it.
Never be able to access it.
That just was
amazing.
Astounding.
Yeah.
So I thought that was something that I would use in Ethel's first plot. I think it was the New York Times did an article on lithium, saying it's the new gold, because the current technology is the best rare element to use for making batteries. It's also something that we only produce 2% of in the world. So I'm thinking, what we're doing is we've tried to become self-sufficient on fossil fuels, but fossil fuels are giving us terrible problems. If we go back to lithium, we're suddenly dependent upon trying to source it from 98% where it's outside of our country coming back. And that lithium mining, at least open pit lithium mining, contaminates the soil for up to 300 years, and the water that's used to process it takes millions and billions of gallons to water it. And I thought, there's conflict. Now, in a story, if you don't have any conflict, you don't have a story. But I thought there were elements that were already at odds with one another. So I had a mining coalition that is set up between the miners of different types that are trying to get their plans approved by the government, that are using federal mineral rights. And we have ranchers who need water for their livestock. We have Native Americans who need water for their fishing and for their lands that are sacred to them. And all that is happening now. So I created what may turn out to be a real Supreme Court case.
I was thinking that this may actually come to be.
Where you've got the ranchers and the Native Americans united against the mining people because of the efforts to save the environment. We're having to kill the environment in order to save the environment. And it's one of those crazy kind of situations.
Yeah, this was really eye-opening for me. I mean, electric vehicles, that's good. We should all be having electric vehicles, right, for the climate. And then it turns out, well, in order to have those electric vehicles, we have to destroy the environment by mining for lithium. It's just, oh my goodness, I never knew.
And all the lithium most of the lithium in the world is processed in China.
And so we've got
we're
all
right
the,
back in a situation there as well. And I think it's been, since I started the book, not because I started the book, but since I started the book, there's been more exposure of that element of it. So I feel like the book is timely in a sense that sometimes you write a topical book, as you know, because your books are all topical, that the world can change on you and make you make an adjustment to what you put down. But it also, I think, makes it interesting to me because I can take something that's happening in the real world and find a way to install it in the book that I'm working on. And that's happened several times.
Well, I think it's wonderful when you read a book that's fun, that's engrossing, that really keeps you, but you're also learning something along the way. And that's what this accomplished for me. It was topical in another way too, which is that as I was reading this and all the Supreme Court intrigue, of course, this year had all sort of ethical scandals coming up in the court. But last year we had, the unprecedented leak of the Dobbs decision, which overruled Roe v. Wade. Did that inspire you to write this book?
No. The reason it didn't is because when COVID came, there was a scandal that certain congressmen were alleged to have been briefed on the devastation that it was and dumped their stocks before the market crashed. So that was in essence insider trading and leaking of information. And so I felt like they say Washington leaks like a sieve. They're usually talking about the Congress. The Supreme Court, I thought, well, no, that's something. They've never had a leak. And surely their cases, the results come out to favor one side or another. And if they're corporations, you do corporate law, if you get an advanced knowledge, do I want to buy or do I want to sell short or whatever we do? So I thought, that's what I'll do. I have these two things I'm interested in. We had a good friend who was a law clerk for the Supreme Court, who invited us to come up and see an argument before the Supreme Court, tell me some of the details about how the court operates, whatever that was helpful for my research. And so I thought, I'm interested in the court. They've never had a leak. I'm interested in lithium mining. That's a crisis we're having to deal with. And then the Dobbs decision comes down. And suddenly there is a leak at the Supreme Court. And I had finished my first draft. So I thought, you all would forgive me, I would hope, if I make up a bunch of fictitious names for the Supreme Court justices, that they're not the real people, but they're my characters. So if you would give me that. I didn't think the readers would give me the fact that I said there'd never been a leak at the Supreme Court, because that's real world. And unless we're on the planet Xenon, which happens to replicate planet Earth, I couldn't get by with doing that. Fortunately, it was more of a interesting fact that it hadn't leaked before. That didn't mean I had to change the plot, but I had to go back and rework it into the story to acknowledge the fact that it had
occurred. Yeah.
And that's happened a couple times with books I've written. It's the flip side of having a topical book, because if the topic changes or something, a friend of mine had the worst possible change happen to a book he was writing. It was called The Secret Diary of Mikhail Gorbachev, which has a great title name. The day that it was released, the Soviet Union collapsed. So everything he had said was suddenly moot, out of date. Fortunately, I've not had that kind of situation happen.
The title of this book is Dangerous Women, and obviously we know that Ethel is a dangerous woman, but it's plural women. Now, I like to think that I'm a dangerous woman, but you weren't thinking of me. Who was the?
I was thinking of
Oh, were you? Who did you mean? Who did you encompass in the term dangerous women?
Actually, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who I had the ability to make a female. And so Clarissa Baxter is her name, and she rises to the occasion herself as far as dealing with what happens with as you said in the setup. Two law clerks are attacked, one is killed, one is put into a coma. And why would they attack? That's when they realize that this document is important, or this way the court's leaning is someone has a vested interest in that. And so Clarissa works with Ethel to get to the truth.
Yeah, so she's the other dangerous woman. She's dangerous in the sense that she's protecting the court, the integrity of the court. She's marshaling all of her fellow justices. They all are working because they all basically go into protective custody because, well, there are some murders along the way, and she works remotely with them, hearing their cases, having their conferences, and so forth. But she rules them all and keeps everybody safe and protects the integrity of the court. So she's a secondary heroine of this book. Now, Ethel has a sidekick,
right?
Jesse, who before we get to that, I wanted to bring up the point, the whole idea of this rooming house. It seemed kind of anachronistic, a rooming house in this day and age. But it occurred to me as reading both books that it's, of course, you'd want such a thing in Washington where you have so many people coming in on just temporary assignments.
Right.
They're not going to want to lease an apartment for a year when they're just in town for 3 weeks now and then maybe 3 weeks again. And so this is,
and hotels are $500.
And hotels, and their per diems are not covering it. So it's a perfect vehicle. And Ethel's tenants, her lodgers, are from all branches of, Justice Department, Secret Service, FBI, and so forth. But one of her lodgers is a young man named Jesse. Tell us about Jesse.
Jesse is related to Ethel, and what I realized I needed, Ethel stands on her own, but it would be helpful to have someone that counterbalances her in age and in technological skills. So Jesse Cooper is his name, was raised in California, came to American University to study graduate work in computer science, and happens to be Ethel's only living relative. He is her double first cousin twice removed.
Now you're going to have to explain what that is.
You all know what that is, I'm sure, but just to tell you briefly, a double first cousin happens when, and we have one in my wife's family.
Oh, wow.
I guess yeah, it'd be one couple. When a sister and a brother married a brother and a sister, so that you as the child, you had an uncle and an aunt that each of them were blood related to you. So you were double first cousins with their children. Twice removed is the generations. So Ethel was a double first cousin, but Jesse's mother was the double first cousin once removed. Grandmother, Jesse's mother was, he's the one twice removed, right? And so she because she had no family, she introduces him that way, just to make sure her family. She never
just says my cousin Jesse.
Right,
She always says
double first cousin twice removed, which people go, huh? And he brings a set of skills that she can direct him to tell him what he needs to do, and he knows how to do it. If it involves hacking or other things that are going on, particularly in the first book where you're dealing with cryptocurrency and that whole computer virtual world. So. And he is amazed by his double first cousin.
He didn't know what all of her skills were until he witnesses it firsthand.
Right, you see, in the first book, one of her roomers is killed on the front lawn. He comes down to try to tell Ethel to stay inside, and Ethel takes charge and knows exactly what to do, and it really stuns him that she's reacting that way, acting that way.
Yeah. She just flies right into motion, takes pictures, do this, do that, and so forth. Yeah. But yet by Dangerous Women, Jesse has already learned a lot about his cousin Ethel, and
there's a certain amount of trust that's in the book, and at the end of the first book, they both have a sense of what it means to be a family, too. I think rather than just this elderly lady who's part of my family, they're now really tight. They're really tight.
Well, Mark, you have been amazingly prolific. How many? Do you even know how many novels you published?
This is the 23rd.
23rd. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? Do you have a regimen? What is your discipline?
Well, my day job is actually doing film and video production work. I write when I can. Fortunately, I can always carry a little journal with me and a pen, so that if I'm delayed for something, or the doctor's office and they're delayed, I can start working with ideas and write. So I can write pretty much anywhere I need to. It may not be good, but there's a certain value in getting something down on the page that you then can work with. And when I started writing, I set myself a very rigid schedule that I would do a page a day, Monday through Friday, and 5 pages over the weekend. So that in a week, I would have done 10 pages. In 39 months or 40 months, I would have had 400 pages. And what I've found, I've gotten away from that, because when I start a manuscript, and as you start a manuscript, the whole world is open to what that first paragraph is going to be. That's good. It's also bad because it's that whole, you're paralyzed with choices.
Yeah.
How do we get started? Where are we taking this story? What's going to happen? And so I found that as you construct a story, you want to keep the reader engaged, wondering who did it. You don't want it to be predictable. You don't want to guess my villain on page 50, and 300 pages later, when the detective reveals it, you were right. It's sort of like, what a stupid detective that was. I got it in 50 pages. So you don't want it to be predictable, but you do want it to be inevitable.
Right.
That's the way it had to end.
Can't come out of left field.
And as you get like halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, whatever, your options have started to dissipate, so that you know where you're going, or at least I do. And I write much faster because I see it starting to write itself in order to get to the end that's predetermined and inevitable. And and I'll write in longhand. I love writing with a fountain pen, and I'll sometimes just changing rooms or going to the computer or coming off the computer can help with writer's block. I don't think it's so much that it's block. It's just a question of you haven't discovered the story
yet.
Yeah,
it's just not there yet. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, my process is much the same as the book that I have coming out next year. I spent 2 months on the first chapter, just trying to, thinking it through. Where am I going with this? But also getting the mood and the tone and the voice and getting all that and then the last 2/3 I wrote in a month. So it just really comes once you're there. Just so the idea of having a regimen of I'm going to do this many words this month and this it never works that way for me. It's not as regimented as that.
Right.
But,
and I don't do that anymore, but I needed that to start with, because I really didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't trust myself to know what I was doing. And so I still don't. I still learn from writers. I learn from reading you. I learn from reading other writers.
I do as well. Yeah.
And from readers. I appreciate readers sending me notes and critical notes, and also things that they like, things that they would like to see more of. So you are especially in a mystery, you are in a contract with the reader to play fair with them and to build the story together, I think. And so that's where it's helpful to hear from readers about what they particularly liked, or
what worked and what necessarily didn't. Yeah. In Dangerous Women, toward the end, I'm not going to say too much because this would spoil something, but there is a set piece, an action scene at the farmhouse, that is absolutely, first of all, unexpected. We didn't know what Ethel was planning to do to stymie the bad guys. And it comes with a wonderful surprise. But I also have to say, Mark, that was very cinematic, the way that played off. And have you thought about, if Ethel were ever to come to the screen, what she would look like?
Well, actually, Sony picked up the film rights for the Secret Lives. Now they haven't done anything with them, because they probably produce 1 out of 100 things they do. So when my publisher said this book's been optioned for film, I thought who I saw. And it's usually like who you would like to meet.
Yes, right.
But it was Jamie Lee Curtis.
Ooh.
I thought she could pull off Ethel with attitude.
Yeah.
As well. But then she won an Oscar, and everything happens
all once. That's right. Yes.
So I thought she's probably gone beyond budget realm.
No, I think she would love to be Ethel. That would be great. Are there going to be more Ethel books after Dangerous Women?
I hope so. I'm working on one now, but you're in that part, sort of in the big bad middle, where you're not quite sure, at least for me speaking, I'm not quite sure where it goes. It's at that point where I have to get enough stuff down to sort of see what seems to be calling me. What direction is it calling me? And I will tell you that, like Ethel had been involved with cryptocurrency, and she's involved with the Supreme Court and lithium, that I'm looking at industrial espionage.
Ooh.
And foreign agents that are involved in that in Washington, D.C., and how Ethel gets involved in that. And for a character like Ethel, the trick is it has to be something that's personal for her. She's not a just curious armchair detective or whatever. It's because someone she loves or is close to or has promised something is killed, and that pulls her in on the case. And so hopefully, it doesn't have a working title yet, other than Ethel Book 3, and a lot of times the publisher suggests a title that's better than what I would come up with.
Yeah,
anyway,
mine always does too. Yeah. My working title never seems to survive. Do you have any words of advice for any aspiring writers who might be in our audience tonight?
I think it's very simple. It's read a lot and write a lot, because everything, I think, know some of the basics, that you need to have conflict in it. You need to have sympathetic characters. If your readers can't find someone to root for, then they're not going to be engaged. For at least I've found that way. If you don't care what happens, then you're not going to be engaged in the book. So if you're writing something, I'd say have a strong plot, but write out of character, because I think it's the characters that people come to associate with, and that's in, I think, current fiction. Character has risen above plot in some ways. Now, for a mystery, you have to have a plot. It has to be plausible. You have to do enough research to know that this could happen or it couldn't happen. So I don't force something that couldn't happen, but if I need it to happen, if I can find a way to work around it, that's why research comes in, to let me know what possibilities are there for me to direct this in a little different direction to have it accomplish what I need to have accomplished. And join a writing group, but don't talk your story to death. I think it loses some of the spontaneity for you. I've been with people that have been in writing groups, and they don't write. They talk about wanting to write, and I think that's where you have to. As a friend of mine called it, the equation is BIC, which stands for butt in chair. That you have to sit down and
actually
do it.
write.
And actually write.
Shall we open up for questions? Anybody?
Let me just say real quick though, I want to recommend Bonnie's book to you, hers too, because talk about topical books. It grew out of the Me Too movement. It's a very interesting take on that movement, because the main character, Kelly McCann, is a defense attorney who was defending the sexual assault men. And when she is then assaulted herself by one of the clients that she helped get off, her whole world turns upside down. And so it's a fascinating look, a psychological thriller, but it also has good old-fashioned murder in it as well. And I can't recommend it highly.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate that.
Should we start off with a live audience question?
Anybody here?
Don't be shy.
You read my mind. Don't be shy. But while you're thinking, maybe a question such as this. What's your favorite note that you've received from an editor, or feedback from a reader that may have stuck with you or even changed how you wrote?
I'll give you two answers. My favorite note from my editor was on my first book, when he called me, and that's unusual because usually the editor will
Just
email
email
you or text you or something like this. But I actually got a phone call, and he said, "We love the opening of your book. We really think it's fantastic." And I'm going, "Okay, what words to live by, you know." Then he said, unfortunately, it's on page 50. So they were telling me to get rid of and rework, and it was kind of like, I was stunned. But then when I saw what he was saying and some suggestions he made of things that could be worked in later, things that, to get the story moving faster, get an inciting incident happening sooner to get the reader engaged. So that was my favorite editor. Parking the car and walking in tonight, I got an email from someone, a reader, who said, I'm 89 years old, and I've read all your Berry books and all your Sam Blackman books, and I just finished Dangerous Women, and I want you to keep writing because I'll keep reading. And so those are the neat little out of the blue.
Yes.
Didn't even have my own last name, so it wasn't a relative. Actually, a real reader who took the time to write. So those are encouraging and
That is
energizing.
lovely. Yes, and energizing to say. Yeah.
I believe it was Lisa Scottolini, who does some mystery thriller. And she said something very similar to you, that she got feedback on one of her books and they said, we love it. The beginning is about at page 197.
Whoa, she got me
said,
beat.
What? But she said it was a great comment that they were right. Her editor was right. And so there's something.
Well, and also that was my first book, and I realized maybe I needed to write those 50 pages.
Yeah.
To get
You
going,
need to know
to
it.
get moving,
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
moving and whatever. And then I'm in a position.
But the reader doesn't need to read it.
And my older daughter, who's a writer, it wasn't her observation. You may know who it was, Bonnie, but it said, this writer had said, the last chapter you write is the first chapter. Because once you see the book as a whole and understand how it came together, then you may want to go back and shift the tone a little bit or things like that, to tweak that first chapter so that it's more in line with the way the book wound up. I think that's all helpful advice.
Mark, do you put out a lot of material that you come to rework later? Is it or once you've written, most of the passages stay somewhat the same?
I'll go back and rework things because there may be something that happened later on that I realized. Sometimes there's a problem in a book. You get a problem and it's not there where the problem became obvious. It was created 50 pages earlier with something that you did. And so to fix it, you need to go back and unravel. Now, what happens, but Bonnie and I were talking before we started, is that sometimes you get too invested in your words and stick with something that should have hit the floor. It's like film, documentaries, Woody, the stuff that you could leave out, you'd love to leave it in there, but it doesn't need to be in there, so therefore shouldn't be in there. So that's some of the stuff is when you writing the book, you realize I made this too, like in Dangerous Women, it starts off in the Chief Justice's office. It actually, first draft started in the basketball court. Now, another thing I learned about the Supreme Court is there's the Supreme Court, and on the floor above the Supreme Court, there's a basketball court, which is a surprise. There's also, the elevators are manned by actual operators. There's little things like that I learned from my friend who worked as a law clerk at the Supreme Court. So that was something that my editor came back and said, we don't need to see them playing basketball. We can talk about it later. And she was right, because it made the difference between having the culmination where the clerks are mugged. It cut the time in half before we got to that, because I think, look at all the books in here, look at all the mysteries in here, and that's great, but it's also competition for Bonnie and I. And so you have to write so that somebody picks up the book, looks at the premise, maybe reads a couple of pages, and if you can't connect with them, they'll move on to something
Because
else.
there's a lot of other stuff there for them.
How closely do you work with an editor during the process?
I usually get approval for the direction I'm going with the story, or I make up something that sounds like that's what the book's going to be about. I don't know if you do that, Bonnie, or not, but
Bonnie would never do that.
a book on crime written under false pretenses. And then sometimes they will like to see maybe 100 pages where you are at 100 pages, just to make sure the pacing is good and is the story engaging. But I really get the most feedback once I've got a draft to deal with. I would like more, because I find it energizing to get good, honest criticism back from an editor. They can really help you, and you have to realize, I have to realize, they say it's not personal. Well, it is personal, because you put your,
It's your
put a
lifeblood.
lot of time into it. But where the trust comes in is that they are not trying to make these changes just because they can, but because they know it'll help the story be better. And that's what we're all working toward. So
No.
good question.
Is it correct that you don't work with an agent?
I don't work with an agent. My agent retired.
Oh,
My agent retired speaking of dangerous women, she retired at age 93.
oh my.
So she was a pistol.
So you were already sufficiently well established that you didn't feel the need to
I
get
had
another
had a
agent.
poison pen kind of
You
taking
had
my,
the relationship
Right.
with your editor, with your publisher, so well established. Yeah, that's nice.
but
they
that
were
doesn't mean I
acquired.
won't have
Poison
an
Pen
agent.
was acquired by Source Books
Yes.
a few years back.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
it's a bigger press now,
Yeah,
is
it
it?
is.
Yeah, but you're still turning out books.
I mean, it's every book has to stand on its own. Every book has to, I'm certainly capable of writing a bad book. So that's why I use the editor. I count the editor on saving me from myself.
Yeah, it's a very good attitude too, yeah.
So question about, and for both of you, how did you get your big break? What was your writing big break?
I'm still waiting for mine, Patricia.
Come on,
I think my big break, I'll take that as being published.
right,
Okay.
Was I acquired an agent, and she also was close friends with the editor-in-chief of Poison Pen Press at the time, Barbara Peters.
Yeah,
And so my agent, Linda, suggested, I'll let her know you're sending her something to do it, but they like to work with their authors very closely. So I would set that in motion and step back, and you submit work to them. So I sent a manuscript, and we went through the layers that it went to, and I got a very nice personal note back from Barbara saying, it wasn't for us, but we would like to see something else. Well, I had the ignorance to just have kept writing, which is the other advice I give a writer.
yeah, just keep
And I had
going.
known I wanted to have a series, even though I hadn't sold the first book. So I sent the second book, was ready to go. She said she wanted to see something else. Okay, here it is. So I gave her the second manuscript, and she wrote me back and said, we'd like to assign an editor to you because I would like to see those two books converge into one, because each of them was a little thin by themselves. But if we can talk about working with that, then they sent me a contract before I had done anything on the merged book. So it's the fact that they took a chance on me and faith in me and helped me, nurtured me, is what I would say was the big break.
Honey, what about you? Big break.
I don't know how big it was, but I had a writing career before Bonnie Kistler. I was Bonnie McDougall, and I published 3 novels back in the 90s. And that I was, practicing law full time, but managing on the train back and forth, scribbling on a legal pad, wrote a story, queried a whole bunch of agents. One called me, she wanted to represent the book. I was thrilled, signed the contract, she sent it out, and she sold it for a big sum right away. And I was thrilled, I thought I'd arrived. But there's lots of stories like that in publishing, when you get the big deal off the bat and then not a good enough follow-up. But I did write 2 more, and then the 4th book did not sell. And I'd left my law firm at this point. I went back to work, I had children I had to educate and so forth. I thought that was it. I'd had my run as Bonnie McDougall, and that was it. But the bug doesn't leave you. Once you've got the bug, it doesn't leave you. So I started writing again. That's where House on Fire originated. I had the same agent all these years, and she would call me from time to time and say, "What are you working on?" And I said, "Well, I've got a brief due to the Third Circuit. I don't have time to write." And she said, "Bonnie, make time."
Right.
And I did, and she went running with House on Fire. But they said, it's been too long since your last books, your Bonnie McDougal books, and they didn't sell, like hotcakes anyway. Let's give you a new name, but it has to be a real name. It can't just be it's a pseudonym picked out of the sky, because you need to have an online presence these days, which is a whole nother topic of social media and what you have to do with social media. But anyway, she said, by happenstance, you have another name, meaning my married name. And I was like, but that's his name. But that's where
Does he charge you to
Bonnie
ring it?
He should be happy I've made him famous.
That's true, very good.
So that was when you kind of came back.
So I had I'm having my second life now. Late in life, having my second life as Bonnie Kistler.
I have a follow-up question to that. What happened to the fourth book?
The fourth book is in a drawer. It's never seen the light of day.
I've got at least 4 in drawers.
Yeah.
Wow.
Curious, as a follow-up to your comment on competition. To me, I've never figured out what draws my eye to the book initially on the shelf. So can you talk a little bit about, the artwork and how it comes to be? Does it evolve from the story? How does a cover come together to attract the reader initially?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if we ever figure it out,
My experience has been the publisher takes care of that. I may give them some ideas, like it's the first Sam Blackman book, is set around the time that the Biltmore, the history part of it, around the Biltmore house was made. So I suggested we use like a hearse vehicle from that age, the Biltmore house on the cover or something like that, which leads me to a quick story on, I went to the Pack Library, which is just right up half a block away, went down through the North Carolina room, and I found a postcard from 1915, which showed the Biltmore house with all these old cars in front of it. And I thought, oh, can I pay for the use of this? I'd like to send it to my publisher just to get an idea of what it would look like. And so they said, fine, was $15 or something like that to use the rights. So I sent it to the publisher, and their art director liked it. And so he used it in the cover of the book. And the Friday before the book is going to press, I get a voicemail message from an attorney for the Biltmore Corporation saying cease and desist using, I said, but it's in public domain. This was like over the limit. He said, it may be public domain for copyright, but the Biltmore house is a trademark. And said that law is not the same as copyright. So I thought, and I couldn't talk to the guy because he left me that message. So I called my publisher, and he went, we'll deal with it. So what they did was gave a license. They gave a license, I think, with minimal charge, just so they could protect their trademark. They didn't care to make a lot of money off of us. They just wanted to make sure.
They have to show that they're policing it.
Right, and in order to preserve it, even though the house was obviously 80, 90 years old, the photograph was, and so I learned the lesson there. They tell me, I usually don't have a whole lot of suggestions for the covers. They said they want something that's atmospheric it may not literally be the scene in the book, whatever, but something that's suggestive, like.
This is a great, because you get the idea of the rooming house.
Right.
But it also looks dangerous, and you see people with guns. And
that's kind of Ethel in each of the windows, looking around. So that's
a tie back to the first book.
Yeah,
The first book had a
and somebody made this observation. They said it also reminded them of the TV show Murders on.
Oh yes,
Which I thought, well, that's pretty smart to kind of ride on that success history as well. And so that's now, Bonnie, you're with HarperCollins. Did their art department?
Yeah, their art department did it, and I have to say I don't have a visual imagination at all. I only deal in words. So when they ask me for suggestions, I'm like, you tell me. But then they send me a lot and then I look at them, no, that's not right. That's not right.
Right.
So I'm good at vetoing, but I'm not good at coming up with anything. And this one went through lots of versions before we finally settled on this. Whereas The Cage, which was my book last year, was the two women stuck in an elevator, and the elevator doors just like this, and you just see a shadowy figure. And that was the very first draft, and it was perfect. I said, yes, that's right, that's it.
But do they give you veto power over the cover?
Well, they certainly asked for my opinion, and since I didn't like anything, they did go back to the drawing board.
Okay.
I don't know if push had come to shove,
Right,
I don't know
right.
whether I would have prevailed or not, but fortunately, my editor wasn't that happy with it either, I guess.
I've not had that issue pop up, but the other part where I've had some input, at least they looked like I was having input, was when they went to pick a narrator for the audio book. They would at least send me 5
Some clips of their,
clips
yeah.
to do, and they went with the one that I picked with. So I think probably and I appreciate that, at least having input.
That's fun. You feel like you're auditioning, like,
Right.
like you're a Hollywood director conducting auditions with these little tiny clips of your voices.
And that's kind of different because I have a voice in my head of what my characters are saying. When you hear somebody actually do it as an audio book, sometimes it makes me sound better than I actually was. But the artwork, and you said you don't know what draws your eye to it. It could be one thing one time and something else another time.
So we're getting to the top of the hour, so final thoughts, Mark?
Well, I would like to thank Bonnie for helping me through the hour
Yeah,
and
thank you for
asking
inviting
such
me.
great questions. And for people that brave the cold, if you're on virtual, it's turned out to be what, 15 degrees or
Feels
20
like it.
degrees of winter came in the last 24 hours. Thank you all for coming out, and especially to Malaprops for sponsoring and working with authors
Yes.
and giving
Malaprop
us
does
a
wonderful job.
platform and for hand selling our books. Because that's what it's all about, getting books to readers and connecting authors to readers. So those are my final thoughts. Thank you very much, Patricia, and everyone here at Malaprop.